All right, we'll get underway. It looks like we have a quorum. Welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee meeting number 17. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. Kelly, may I ask for a roll call, please?
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Curry. Councillor Dudas. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kavanaugh. Present. Councillor Kelly. Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Tierney. Councillor Troster. Here. Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
And Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. My understanding is Councillor Curry is running a little bit late. And good morning. Welcome to Councillors Menard and Desroches who have joined us. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.1 to 4.5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on November 8th, 2023, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Are the minutes of the Planning and Housing Committee meeting number 16 confirmed? Thank you. Let's see what on the agenda we can carry now. There is the first item for 1 on 178 through 200 Isabella. We have a presentation. There are delegations, so we're going to hold that item. Item 4.2 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 1400 Upper Canada Street. There's a technical motion on that. We don't have any delegations from the general public. The applicants are here. Councillor Gower, could you move the, Vice Chair Gower, could you move the technical motion, please?
Yes, thank you. Whereas the report recommends amending the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw to permit a heavy equipment and vehicle sales, rental and servicing use. And whereas document 2, the details of recommended zoning does not explicitly indicate the zoning change requested. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning and Housing Committee amend the report to include in document 2 an item stating rezone the land shown in document 1 from IP 13 to IP 13 XXXX. And therefore, be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act as amended.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Monsieur Saunders, Black and Walker are here on behalf of the applicant. If we're prepared to carry this, did you still need to speak? Thank you. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Is the technical amendment carried? Is the report as amended carried? Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for your work on that. Zoning bylaw amendment 4338 Innes Road in Orleans, South Navan. We don't have a presentation. We don't have any delegations from the general public. There was no correspondence on this item. Tyler Yakchuk from Voten is here on behalf of the applicant. Tyler, if the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak? Thank you. Is that item carried? Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly, for your work on that. Zoning bylaw amendment at 222 Baseline Road. We have the applicants, we have public delegations, so presentations, so we're going to hold that item. The next item is the zoning bylaw amendment, part of 3700 Twin Falls Place. Neither the applicants nor any delegations from the public are here. Is that item carried? Thank you. Morning, Councillor Johnson. Oh, shit. Oh. Office to residential conversions, the highlight issue for today. I think obviously we have a presentation and we have motions on that, so we're going to hold that one. And if I can, I'm just going to, there is an IPD on today's agenda, update on Planning Act requirements for PMTSA's protected major transit station areas. Were any members, did any members want that lifted? I don't see that. Can we just receive that IPD now? Thank you. Let's go back. So the first item is the zoning bylaw amendment for 178 through 200 Isabella Street. Masha is able to give us a presentation on this one. So we'll hear the presentation, then we'll move to public delegations before we move on to questions of staff. Good morning, team. We're in your hands.
Good morning, co-chairs and members of the Planning Committee. I'm Masha Vakula, planner and file lead on the zoning bylaw amendment for 178-200 Isabella Street property to permit a 19-story high-rise apartment building. Next slide, please. The subject property is located in the Glebe neighborhood and is an amalgamation of 4 lots, municipally known as 178, 180, 182, and 200 Isabella Street, forming a regular lot with an area of approximately 2,400 square meters and 77 meters of frontage. The site is located on the south side of Isabella Street, immediately south of Provincial Highway 417, between O'Connor Street to the east and Bank Street to the west. The properties are currently vacant. Next slide, please. The subject site is currently zoned general mixed-use zone, subzone 4, with urban exception 168, which permits a broad range of non-residential and residential uses up to apartment dwelling mid-rise. The property is subject to the Bank Street in the Glebe secondary plan that was approved by council on December 8, 2021. Next slide, please. The big aspect of the current proposal is to bring the existing zoning in line with the before mentioned Bank Street in the Glebe secondary plan. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment seeks to rezone the subject site to permit apartment dwelling high-rise and additional commercial uses to allow flexibility of the ground floor uses further in the project and to regulate the height through the schedule. Next slide, please. And to introduce a new site-specific exception to permit the following: maximum building height as per proposed schedule, 2.7 meters front yard setback, 0.75 meters landscape buffer with a back screen from residential properties to the rear, no parking for non-residential uses, compact parking spaces for visitors, reduced width of the driveway and covered ramp access to the underground parking with a setback no less than 0.75 meters from the property line and not taller than 3 meters. And the last projections above the building height and beyond building envelope. Next slide, please. The site plan and angular plane demonstrate the siting of the building and transition to the low-rise residential properties to the south as per the Bank Street in the Glebe secondary plan. Next slide, please. The proposal is consistent with the intent and policies of the provincial policy statement, official plan, the Bank Street in the Glebe secondary plan, urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings. Accordingly, staff recommends this zoning bylaw amendment to be approved. Next slide, please. And thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have representatives for the applicant here. Paul Black is with Foten and Kevin Harper with Minto. We're in your hands for 5 minutes. I'm not sure where. Oh. We're in your hands, Paul.
Thank you very much. Morning, Mr. Chair, members of committee. My name is Paul Black. I'm an associate at Foten Planning and Design. I am joined this morning by Kevin Harper from Minto, who's in the gallery, if there are questions specific for him. First, I'd like to thank staff for their presentation. This has been a file that's been in the works for several years now, and we're happy to have it finally come to committee with what we think is an appropriate and excellent intensification of a property in the downtown core. As was touched on by, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. As was touched on by Masha in her presentation, the site is part of the Bank Street and the Glebe secondary plan, which was approved recently for the site. It does permit heights up to 19 stories on the subject property adjacent to Isabella Street, and is based on an angular plane from Laurier Avenue to the south. Next slide, please. The proposed development is a 19-story residential building. It has 234 residential units with 132 parking spaces provided within a below-grade garage, in addition to 3 surface visitor parking spaces. All loading is internal to the site, internal to the building, I should say. And all parking is accessed through the below-grade parking ramp, which is in the rear of the property. The building's undergone several iterations over the course of the application review, mostly related to the upper tower form. A few things have informed that. There's a multi-use pathway proposed along Isabella Street. That's a city project. So the space has been provided for that, both in the form of a 2.3 meter widening along Isabella, as well as a 1.5 meter pedestrian clearway in addition to the multi-use pathway. So that sets back the ground floor a fair distance. The rear setback has always been held at 7.5 meters to provide transition to the existing dwellings and mixed use along Pretoria to the south. And that's been retained through design revisions with staff. Additional setbacks and step backs were added above the podium, a 2 meter setback to the tower, and on the upper floors as well. The tower, defined as above 10 stories, provides separation of 18.5 meters to the east, which is a future high-rise site as identified in the Bank Street and the Glebe secondary plan, and 11.8 meters to the west to the Randall site, which is also a high-rise site identified in the secondary plan. Both those separations, in addition to the tower floor plate, which is 771 square meters, align with the city's urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings, which would and the city's high-rise zoning provisions in section 77 of the zoning bylaw. And in our opinion, makes the proposed tower form appropriate. The rear of the property is landscaped as shown here. I will note that we're at a zoning bylaw amendment stage, and so this is a concept plan, but we have spent a fair bit of time looking at the trees in the rear and how those would function. Soil volumes today would permit up to 5 trees in the rear, with that would grow to a small trees as they're defined. But further through site plan, greater soil volumes could be achieved, which would permit greater tree growth as well. In addition to the setback and those trees, a privacy screen is proposed along the east, south, and west property lines to buffer from the adjacent residential and office uses. The overall parking rate, as I mentioned, there's 132 spaces below grade, which results in an approximate rate of 0.5 spaces per unit, with a 242 bike parking spaces provided, so just over 1 per unit. I believe that's all I need to say this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Black. Sorry, do we have members have questions for the applicant? It's the opportunity at planning. We won't be bringing the applicant back unless there's sort of significant motions on the table. So I don't see any questions for you, Paul. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the general delegates. Marko Miljusevic. I apologize if I got that name wrong. Is not online. Okay.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Oh, there you are, Marco.
Hi.
Marco, welcome to Planning and Housing Committee meeting. You have 5 minutes to address the members.
Perfect. Thank you. And you pronounced my name correctly. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, just wanted to say I really enjoy the presentation that I saw and all the information in the proposed building on Isabella Street. I really like the last thing I heard there about the bike parking. I think that's something that we really need to focus more on in our urban core, that a lot of people in that area don't need a car. And so going away from like parking minimums and preferring things like bike parking space, or even just getting rid of all sorts of parking, because a lot of people there either walk or take public transit and stuff, so they don't need that space, and that opens up more space for other types of buildings. So overall, I really like it. I think the proposition is fitting in the area. I live really close by, and there's tons of buildings of that similar size in the area. It's a great area, lots of amenities, lots of restaurants. There's a grocery store like a half-a-minute walk from there. So it's a perfect place for good density. I think the more density like this that we have in the area will help with things like being able to provide better public transit, because everything is a lot closer by when it's denser. And so less need for cars, and we can open up the streets more for things like buses and stuff like that, which will hopefully help alleviate a lot of the congestion that we see on Bank Street, which I know Councillor Menard mentions a lot, and I agree with. There's definitely an issue on Bank Street, and I think the more density that we have in that area will help alleviate some of that. So yeah, overall, I think very happy with this. I really hope it goes through. I think this kind of density, and I understand we don't want all of our city to be, 18-story buildings and stuff like that. So there's a time and a place to put stuff like that. But I think this is definitely a time and a place, especially as we're in a housing crisis, as a lot of us can agree on. I'm very happy with this proposal, and I hope it goes through. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Are there any questions from members? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your time. Carolyn McKenzie. Yeah, I think perfect. Good morning, Carolyn. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Sorry, it's been a while. Thank you and good morning. My name is Carolyn McKenzie. I chair the Planning Committee for the Glebe Community Association. I also serve as a member of the city's Planning Advisory Committee. I wanted to confirm this morning that the GCA supports intensification, and I'm not here to object whatsoever to this application, which may come as a surprise to some of you when you see the GCA show up. But also to say that it has taken over 3 years to acknowledge. It's taken over 3 years, I think it is, to reach this committee. At the same time, I just wanted to put on the record a few of the understandings of 3 commitments that I believe are connected or should be connected with this committee's approval. I had the opportunity to speak with staff, Masha, just yesterday about that, and I appreciated her time. The first is that the final design should be in accord with the city's high-rise design guidelines, and Masha, you mentioned that during your presentation, with the exception of a small excess of the tower footprint, excess to the guidelines themselves. That's a minor increase. But as we know, the high-rise guidelines, they are just guidelines, and the city uses some discretion. But given that this building backs directly onto a low-rise residential neighborhood, it's important that they be adhered to moving forward through site plan. The second is that the city will require sufficient soil depth and volume to be provided at the rear of the property so that reasonably sized trees can thrive and contribute to the urban canopy, as well as providing a green buffer to neighboring properties. And finally, that this project will go before the city's own urban design review panel during the site plan process, and that reasonable efforts be made to ensure that this building contributes to an eventual streetscape for new residents that will be pedestrian and active transportation friendly, given its location. So I assume that unless there's a different understanding amongst the committee, these will be included in the city's approach to seeing this project move forward, and we hope that it does. I also wanted to take this opportunity to recall for this committee that this property on Isabella lies within an area covered by the Bank Street secondary plan, as Masha also mentioned. The GCA worked very closely with residents and with city staff on the secondary plan that was approved about 2 years ago now. The plan allows for this 19-story building that will accommodate 250 units as of right, and really, I think, has helped pave the way for its approval here today. I wanted to also underline to this committee that the 3 years it has taken for this file to reach you is not the result of any action taken by my community residents to obstruct or slow down this file. In fact, given community support for the secondary plan, I think the opposite can be said. Often, my community is accused of NIMBYism, of objecting to intensification, when in my view, the actual track record says otherwise. It's happening again right now in relation to the Lansdowne 2.0 rezoning application for the residential towers. And this is a case where the city's own report indicates that a third tower has been removed from that proposal and the number of residential units reduced as a result of community consultations. But the city fails to mention that its own UDRP clearly recommended that the third tower should be removed if Lansdowne is to be a successful gathering space in future. That omission just breeds division, and I don't think it's helpful to discussions of planning and development in the city. So today I'm going to end my comments simply by asking the city to acknowledge the record of this file and the community's role so that there's no misunderstanding. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. We'll see if there are any questions from members, and Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Carolyn, for being here. Do you remember when we held a public consultation on this file?
I do. As I said, it's been a while. This, in fact, when I saw the notice that it was coming to planning committee, I thought, wow, it's what's been happening in the meantime. It's been such a long time since I think it was 3 years ago, and I just reintroduced myself to Kevin Harper again this morning. Had lots of chats with him along the way, but that's going back about 3 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 3 years ago. We held a consultation in 2020, and that discussion was very positive.
Yeah.
And I think the community was positive. We were positive. We were kind of waiting for this to come back, and it's come back at this time. And maybe I should have asked the applicant why it took so long, because I think, Chair, in this committee, you're approving, and council's been approving thousands and thousands of units, many of which are not being built. And so I just wonder, Carolyn, on your comment on that, because certainly we worked hard on that Bank Street secondary plan to have 4, 6, 8, 7, 9, and high rises all through the Bank Street corridor.
That's
This
right.
is one of them, and I'm in support of this application. But the types of changes that come from that 2020 date to this date now is what I'm interested in from you, because I want to support this. I want community to support it, but I want to make sure that we're not diluting it, and that there's things that aren't coming out last minute that should be in there. So just comments on that, if there's some changes that you might be seeking in terms of that soil depth, or that we're sticking to, I guess, what we said we were going to do back in 2020 when we had a positive consultation about this.
Yeah, thank you. And again, my comments are not, this is not a criticism of Minto either. Yeah, I don't know what the reason that it's taken so long, but it's not a criticism. I know they've got lots of things on their plate. So don't, again, don't take it that way. I just would not want members to be left with the impression that we have slowed this down and that we have been obstructionists, because again, I feel that that's sort of been an easy thing to point to. When things seem to take so long to get moving. But again, and the reason that I came here today about with these 3 issues was because they're not things that specifically I don't believe will show up in the rezoning. And typically once the rezoning goes through, we'll sort of, and you get through site plan. This one, not so much, obviously, but in other cases, it can be an exhausting process from a volunteer perspective. to stay on these files. And then you get to site plan, you've had what you think are good discussions and understandings, and you don't pay as much attention perhaps as you should. It goes through site plan. And then things like space for trees suddenly don't happen. And we have a couple of examples, a couple of larger developments that have been built on Bank Street where I can point to things that where I believe we had understandings with a developer. And those things ultimately have not happened. There's I'll call it the beer store building, the Amica building, which has been up now for a couple of years. I think where we got to with that building is a good space. But one of the things we talked about were the street trees, and there's a particular notch in one corner of the building that was built, and that's a good thing. But it was meant to be, and the discussion was that we would have, it would make room for a mature, large street tree. And right now it's just this very, I don't even know. It's just hardscaping. There's nothing, the notch is there. The building has been notched to accommodate the tree. It's just got interlock and nothing else. There's not a stick of green on that in the corner that we talked about. And I think that's a real miss. And I think it's a real miss for the building as well, and for the success of the building and the attractiveness of the building. And I noticed that corner still doesn't have a tenant. So, you know, those things matter, I think, to the attractiveness of buildings as well. I think it's in the interest of the developer. And not to not to put Kevin on the spot, but I did understand that with the Minto building that is now occupied on the other side of Bank Street, we had discussions about a POP, a privately owned public space on the corner. We do have a couple of trees that went in there, but I don't feel that that has lived up to the discussion that we had about a green space on that corner. We just haven't seen it. So anyway, that's why I'm here today. I think it's important to put those discussions apparently on the public records so that we can make sure we don't lose sight of them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I don't see any other questions from members, so I appreciate your intervention on that. There are no further delegations. Is this item carried? Thank you.
Just a brief question to staff if I can, Chair. Sorry.
Oh,
It's
shoot.
okay. I just wanted to
course.
make sure that staff understand the three issues Carolyn raised and that they'll be taking them into consideration because we don't have a say in site plan anymore, as I understand it, for this piece. And there's two issues. One, the three issues that Carolyn raised, but then also I understand this is subject to CBC and not the Section 37 despite the time, because of the timing. Can you just clarify that piece?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, CBC will be applicable at site plan. The medium-sized trees will be the soil volumes and the depths will be reviewed through the site plan as well. And the third one, my apologies.
So the one piece that Carolyn mentioned around the pop green space piece. So I know there was some discussion in 2020. There's related properties nearby. I know you've worked with the applicant throughout, but just on that piece alone, just if you could comment on that. And then Carolyn, I'm trying to remember the third one you raised.
Mr. Chair, regarding the POPs, there was maybe discussions years ago about that being a possibility, but there is no direction in the secondary plan for this area to have a POPs on this property. So we've worked very closely with our policy team reviewing this application to ensure that the proposed building height and the angular plane transition that happens at the rear, as well as the 6-story podium, is consistent with that secondary plan. There's no direction for a POPs. On the three items that the Glebe Community Association mentioned, it was final design of the tower being in accordance with our high-rise guidelines, ensuring that the rear yard had adequate space for good urban tree canopy. And the third one was to confirm that the site will return to UDRP at site plan. I have no concerns with those three items. Those are all things we've already been actively discussing with the applicant, reviewing for the purpose of the landscaping. This is very similar to Hawthorne in that we're quite comfortable with the details that we're seeing at zoning stage. But those landscaping for those good sized trees along the rear will be solidified through site plan. And it's already confirmed that the item will return to urban design review panel when we have that site plan application. And Councillor, while I appreciate the comment that you don't have delegated authority on site plan, your comments and involvement are absolutely welcome just to make that distinction.
Appreciate that. I do just on the CBC charges, how, do we know how much would be coming for affordable housing, for example? Do we have a total? I know it's just, I guess it's decided at site plan as a total. But just on the affordable housing piece, like, can you just talk about the affordable housing, if there's any in the building, and how much it would come from CBC otherwise?
It's too early stages to have that discussion, Chair. The community benefits bylaw would default to a 4% charge of the land value, and that would be determined and discussed at the time of site plan. Whether the developer comes forward with proposal for in-kind contributions, that remains to be unseen, but that's because we don't have the benefit of that application at this time. But it will be subject to the CBC bylaw.
And are there any affordable units proposed for the building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockton.
Thanks, Chair. Just a small question in the grand scheme of things. Given the vintage of this application, why is the local councillor does not have authority over the site plan? I thought if an application was submitted prior to, was it mid-year, that the old rules would still apply?
The applications were, through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, the applications were submitted not concurrently, so right now we have only zoning bylaw amendment and the site plan application is not in place yet.
So the revised rules regarding site plan apply to when the actual site plan itself application is submitted?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Are there any other questions for staff? I don't see any. So now I'll ask, is this item carried? Thank you. Thank you very much, Master, for your work on that. Moving on. Did we approve 14? Yes. 1400 was approved, right? Thank you. Like hours ago. It is a lot of fun. Which brings us then to item 4.4, the zoning bylaw amendment for 222 Baseline Road in beautiful River Ward. There are presentations on this. There is a technical motion. Can I ask Vice Chair Gower to put that on the table, please?
Yes, whereas the report recommends amending the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw to permit a 4-story apartment building at 222 Baseline Road, whereas document 2 indicates in column 4, section 2B, that the site-specific exception would prohibit low-rise apartment buildings of 10 units or less, and whereas the intent of document 2 was to ensure that low-rise apartment dwellings must have more than 10 dwelling units, therefore be it resolved that document 2 be amended to move section 2B from column 4 to column 5, and therefore be it further resolved the report be amended by replacing the text in document 2, section 2B with a low-rise apartment dwelling must have a minimum of 11 dwelling units, and therefore be it resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Okay, thank you. Craig Hamilton is our planner on this. Good morning, Craig. We're in your hands for a presentation on what the applicant is asking for.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of committee. Today we are discussing a proposed zoning bylaw amendment located at 222 Baseline Road. Next slide, please. So this site is located near the intersection of Baseline Road and Fisher Avenue on the south side of Baseline within the Carlton Heights community of River Ward. Next slide. This site is in the southeastern intersection of Baseline Road and Lexington Avenue, directly across from the experimental farm. And this site currently has a single detached home located on it and is within an established residential block. Next slide. So this is a contextual street level image of 222 Baseline Road and Lexington Avenue taken on Baseline looking east. There we can see the existing single detached dwelling on the site. Next slide. The current zoning is R1 with a subzone GG and generally permits only single family dwellings. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would change the zoning to R4 UD to permit the low rise apartment use. And a site-specific exception would amend some of the provisions of the zone. Namely, it would provide a minimum density of 11 units or more within the low-rise apartment. This provision has the effect of ensuring that the proposal will go through the site plan control process. The site-specific exception would also reduce the minimum front yard setback from 4.5 meters to 4 meters and reduce the minimum parking space rate from the 3 required spaces to 0. There's no intent to change the visitor parking space rate. Staff have also included a provision stating that each additional unit above the planned 18 dwelling units will require 1 tenant parking space to capture any changes to the building design. Next slide. So this is an excerpt from Schedule B of the official plan showing Baseline Road in relation to the nearby designations. We have Baseline Road shown as a Main Street corridor, Fisher Avenue and Meadowlands as minor corridors, and the blue nodes or dots along Baseline Road are the transitway stations, and the purple speckled areas are the evolving neighborhoods surrounding the subject site. Next slide. A brief overview of the official plan policies relating to the development. The property is located within the outer urban transect policy area. So this area is recognized to largely contain a suburban style of development, but is anticipated to gradually evolve towards an urban land use pattern and a 15-minute neighborhood model. It also states that low to mid density developments are encouraged along corridors, which respect transitions into established neighborhoods. But these also provide or are to provide density to support the rapid transit system. The transect policies recognize the suburban land use patterns of the area, but encourage gradual development towards more built urban forms. The property is designated as Main Street corridor within the official plan. These policies recognize that corridors have a different built form context than the interior neighborhoods and encourage the residential uses to integrate with an eventual mixed use urban environment. Next slide. For those lands immediately surrounding the subject property, they are largely contained within the evolving overlay. This is a policy area that provides direction to the built form where we are anticipating a change in character and a land use pattern through development. Next slide. The property is also located within the Carlton Heights secondary plan area. Under this plan, it is designated as neighborhood low rise on Schedule A. This designation allows up to a full 4 stories and anticipates or acknowledges that the greater densities will be located along the corridors. Ensuring adequate stormwater management considerations is a key focus of this plan. Next slide. As for a brief policy overview, the proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement as well as the official plan policies for the outer urban transect and Main Street corridors, particularly those policies which seek to encourage higher density development along the corridors, support multimodal transportation, the creation of 15-minute neighborhoods, and the intensification targets. Similarly, the proposal aligns with the intent of the secondary plan with respect to density and allows for a thorough review of the stormwater management strategies through a subsequent site plan control application. Therefore, staff recommend the approval of the proposed amendment. And next slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions of staff after the public delegations. So first, on behalf of the applicant, Peter Hume. And after Peter, Elizabeth Costello will be our next delegation. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
We're in your hands.
It is a pleasure to be here. Unlike Minto, it hasn't taken 3 years to get to planning committee. But from the date of our first pre-consult to today has been 17 months. So it's not an unsubstantial amount of time. And the site plan process, which will enter for this little, 4-story building, if the zoning is approved, probably we budget 18 months. So, it's to put a project like this on the books and in the ground, you're really looking at a 3-year time frame, and then you have to get a building permit and all the the steps along the way. So it is a very significant endeavor. And so things that happen here don't immediately always translate into buildings on the ground. They do take a significant amount of time and effort. And this little low-rise apartment building on a busy Baseline Road is 7 studio apartments, 7 1-bedrooms, and 4 2-bedrooms apartments. It's ideally located 250 meters from the future Fisher Transit Station and 500 meters from the Prince of Wales transit stations. And one of the things that the people who are building these small missing middle developments like this one have really taken to heart is the direction in the official plan to move to more sustainable modes of transit. Sustainable modes of transportation, sorry. When you look at the official plan, you get a clear direction that parking is not a priority anymore. What you want development to do is to try to move people away from land area consumed by surface parking or cars and onto more sustainable transportation. And this is what this development and this zoning is trying to do. It minimizes the amount of parking that's required by design, consistent with your official plan, to take advantage of the significant investment that you're going to make in transit along the Baseline corridor. And I talk about parking and cars because that was one of the key takeaways from the community consultation that was held. There was a desire to ensure that there was more parking. And part of the challenge in building these small missing middle developments is that if you provide more parking, there's not a lot of space for surface parking. So you're going to drive that to underground parking, and underground parking for little developments like this, it's just not economically feasible. I mean, if that's the direction, then these projects aren't going to happen. So what we've come forward to do is to propose a low-rise apartment building consistent with the official plan that minimizes the impact of parking and starts to evolve the built form along your major transit transit nodes from that single family home that really in today's environment isn't really an appropriate built form along Baseline Road to what is more consistent with your official plan. So Mr. Chair, that's all I have to say. Just to thank Mr. Hamilton for all his hard work in getting us here. We appreciate the work and the effort he's taken to craft the zoning to bring it here to you today.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hume, for your delegation this morning. And I agree with a lot of what you've said. And thank you for acknowledging some of the concerns that the community has raised with you during the consultation process that we've both attended. One of those fears is parking. And while people may roll their eyes due to the location of this property to Baseline and the future BRT, some of the history that exists in the community with other infills is the lack of parking and the type of on-street infiltration that has led to, and a number of issues, legitimate issues that the community has been trying to address. So how will you inform future tenants of your building that parking is not available? Will there be wording in the actual lease that says this is not available, and basically future tenants have to make a decision one way or another because of that?
I think, and I'll look to city legal, but I think that you can make that requirement through the site plan process that people be notified that parking is not provided. And in that case, if that's the case, we're happy to accept that.
Mr. Chair, that is already one of our standard conditions that we've inserted in the past. So we do have the precedent for that already.
So is staff confirming that that will be the case for this property?
I would look to the planner on that, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we do have the ability to do that. That's reasonable in this circumstance.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can I
Chair.
jump in there? Just,
Yeah.
the language that I understand we use in site plan is to require the landlord to tell the tenant that parking is not available from the landlord. I think what a number of us, and I continue to express this frustration, what tenants need to understand is that there may not be parking available in the neighborhood. That it may be extremely challenging. We know that when these no parking buildings go in, that neighbors will call bylaw on cars parked over time. There are winter daytime parking bans that make parking challenging, overnight winter parking bans that make it challenging. Increased competition on the street for parking means that sometimes there's not parking available. I would love to evolve that language that we're using in our standard site plan conditions to indicate that parking more broadly is not just not available from your landlord, but may not be available and is not guaranteed in the broader community as well. So I apologize for jumping in there, Riley, but this is a point that's with these R4 developments that are going in is becoming more and more important.
Mr. Chairman, that wording's not inappropriate, right? I mean, it recognizes the reality of the situation and informs the tenant or the renter of what exactly they may expect in the neighborhood. And I think to your point, and you've said it before, the other thing that you don't want landlords doing is saying there's no parking in the building, but nudge, nudge, wink, wink, just park on the street. So, you know, we for this development, at least accept that. And whatever wording the city comes up with that says, you know, there's no parking here, there may not be parking on the street, and it's going to be acceptable as we go forward.
Yeah, Chair, I think that's, I appreciate that. This is the oldest section in Carlton Heights, 80 years old. It's rural roads, ditches, no sidewalks. And in the winter with snowbanks, you can imagine how narrow the streets are. So you'll hear in the next delegation that this is a legitimate issue. And while we accept the fact the BRT is coming at some point and will be a game changer for public transit in this neighborhood, the reality is with past infills, this has been an issue. And so we're trying to get ahead of this to make sure that future tenants at this property are well aware of the limitations with respect to parking. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. I don't see any other questions, but Peter, I just want to confirm, your client is in front of us today seeking a rezoning because the property currently allows only a single detached home, right?
That's correct.
On Baseline Road?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next public delegation. Thank you very much for your intervention today, Mr. Hume. Elizabeth Costello. I don't know if she's in the room or online.
I am here.
Online.
Thank you. If I could have my presentation, I can share here. No, I'm disabled sharing my presentation. Okay. All right. I'm with the Carlton Heights and Area Residents Association. Thank you for having us today. Next slide. We work really diligently with our residents. We relay the interpretation of City of Ottawa policies to the best of our ability, and we convey residents' feedback, inquiries, and concerns. And we're really here to support growth that's safe and healthy for the community. Go forward, please. Okay, you know where we are. We're just past the experimental farm by Hogsback and Rideau River. Forward, please. Come and join us in Carlton Heights. You know, we want to support the official plan that's really developing a city where people want to live, work, and play. And it takes a balanced approach to growth management so that we recognize the infrastructure and services without adding extra costs to growth as we grow. Forward, please. As David Wise said, with the comprehensive zoning bylaw review, that growth with incremental change is important to mitigate the impact of intensification, given the limitations of our services and infrastructure. Forward, please. We do have nonconformity here with our secondary plan. We did seek counsel on this. There is more need for tree planting and urban greening to help us with the climate resilience and increase the imperviousness of the site to manage our stormwater, which is a problem in our area. Go forward, please. So we welcome this built form. We really do want this on in this area and welcome residents to our neighborhood. We're concerned about the change in setback. It's right over a key catch basin that supports the system of the area. And even the engineers were questioning if that, we have to put steel around it to support it. We've got more pedestrian over the traffic over this area. Will it stand up? So lots of assumptions there. So we question that. But most importantly, really the big issue, let's be honest, it's the parking. We would prefer that you uphold the zoning requirement for parking. We don't see why in the absence of transit here that we go without parking. Really the funding is incomplete, the zoning bylaw is incomplete, but if there is no flexibility, we do believe that living with dignity and affordability means contract covenants. So detailing no unit parking and no street parking will help people along the way, and that these interior visitor spaces aren't used for garbage. And again, we've touched on the tree planting and urban greening to help us with our stormwater management and certainly to help us mitigate the transition from that fifth floor amenity space. Next slide, please. Look, we're an old neighborhood. Imagine trying to navigate in a wheelchair around these parked cars. It really comes down to about 8 feet that you're navigating. A young individual on a bike trying to peek out from that car, or an experienced cyclist would have trouble here, let alone walking your dog, your stroller. Look, these are real issues, and we just don't have wide streets. We don't have sidewalks. We've got aging ditches and aging boulevards. If we can go forward, please. Here we go. We've got our overflows. Next slide. Lots of stormwater, lots of flooding. So go forward, please. We've got degrading boulevards that are affecting our ditches and undermining our roads. This is right at that same corner. Go forward, please. Look, we've got traffic. It's bumper to bumper. Traffic's not going away. So go forward, please. So guess what? Lots of 311 calls, lots of them. And we've got lots of escalation, threats, weird things happening of, trucks running over parking signs and threatening neighbors, codfish thrown at a door. I mean, things are escalating here and enforcement is on the rise. Go forward, please. And this is affecting costs down the line. So we urge you to really hold back on amendments and start looking at what's actually happening in their neighborhoods, and let's have more transparency. So go forward, please. Please help us have more spaces for residents, but make sure that we're living together in more harmony. Okay, thank you for your time.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. Are there any questions from members? I don't see any. Elizabeth, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you, and we want to thank the willingness for the covenants in the contracts. We think that's a big move forward. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I missed that.
We just want to thank both the planning team and the developer on considering those contract covenants for parking is unavailable. We think that's really important for new residents coming to our area. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope that this one, since we've had a fairly rich discussion of it, might help accelerate the evolution of some of that language. So it's important. Okay, that's it. Oh, sorry, Marco Mijuvcevic.
Hello.
Marco, welcome back. Another 5 minutes.
Thank you. Another great proposal that I really like seeing. While looking at this proposal, I was doing a bit of research into the rest of our city, and one of the numbers that I came across was slightly shocking to me. In our city, we have 46% of our land devoted to R1 zoning, 14% to R2 zoning, and 29% to R3 zoning. Sparing the specifics, all three types of the zoning, which add up to 79% of our city's land, is fairly low density. What this creates is car-dependent infrastructure, and obviously, as the previous delegate mentioned, obviously people need cars to get around, but we can't solve this unless we move away from this type of zoning. The denser that we get, the easier it is for people to get by without cars. And so obviously we can't transport ourselves from now to 7 years in the future where we have a dense city, but we need to make gradual steps. And a proposal like this redevelopment would be an amazing step towards that. So we definitely need to be zoning our city for more dense parts, and especially on big arterial roads like Baseline, where we've seen in the future we will have a bus rapid transit, hopefully, and this would help again alleviate the issue of cars. And given that so much of the street is already R1 zoning, if people want to live with cars there, they have the opportunity on plenty of other spaces on this road. Adding one extra non-car dependent lot, I don't think will be the end all be all for people who choose to live there, as long as it is advertised correctly to the people who would be potentially renting from there, and they are aware that they will not have any parking spaces available to them. I think it is, there's nothing wrong with that. The area is very good. There's a university really nearby. There's a high school. There's plenty of schools in the area that are walkable or bikeable distances. And so this would be great for young families or young adults who are going to be going to study. There's a little bit of a lack of grocery stores in the area, which I find slightly concerning. But again, we can't have everything be perfect. So it's not the end of the world. I think, again, removing parking can seem like a very drastic step for a lot of people because so much of our culture is ingrained in driving everywhere. But again, the only way we can get away from this is by slowly taking steps in the right direction. I think the proposed building also doesn't really look out of place. Something like a 4-story building would not look very different from the 2 or 1-story single family homes that are already in the area. So I don't think it would cause any issues with the neighborhood character. And again, I don't think we're taking such a huge step that we're placing a huge apartment building there or something, which I could understand the concern of. This would very much fit in the character of the area. I think we should not prevent ourselves from taking steps in the right direction because we are achieving to strive for a perfect solution. Obviously, again, this is harkening back to the lack of parking, but we're not going to get a perfect solution right away. Small steps like this are perfect for us, and we can't change how the past of our city was built, but going forward, I think we should look towards the right way to build, which is more dense, medium density, similar to cities in like Montreal or a lot of Europe, where a lot of people love going and visiting and living. And I think this will help solve the housing crisis that we're currently in. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Marco. I don't see any questions for you. Appreciate the second intervention. Which brings us to Mr. Brandon Bay. Brandon, you welcome to Planning and Housing. You've got 5 minutes
thanks.
to make the presentation.
I'll be brief because Marco said most of what I wanted to say, and we don't need to repeat everything all day for you guys. I'm really excited about this project, and I hope it's the start of a trend that means we don't have to come by and do this so often anymore, because it's exactly the kind of missing middle housing that Make Housing Affordable has been calling for a couple of years now, and it's in a community that nominally isn't zoned for this, but to hear them comment as well that they're excited about it and they support the built form, and they've just got a few concerns around the details of it, the infrastructure to support it. It's great. It means the tides are changing and we're starting to see real community support for the kinds of projects, the kinds of housing we need in the community. And the planned baseline rapid transit line we're hoping to put in there only works if we've got a population to support it. And so rather than be in a chicken or egg situation, do we have the people, do we have the transit first? We're just starting to build both together, and that's the right way to go about this. And I'm excited to see it and happy to throw my support behind this project.
Brandon, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I'm looking around to see if there are any questions for you from members, of which I see none. Thank you very much for your presentation. So members, we will move on to questions of staff. I don't see any. Okay. Wilson, what's the bus that goes through here? Is it the 118? It's been a long time.
C88.
Sorry?
88.
88, thank you. Is this item, sorry, there we go. Councillor Brockington.
Chair, thank you. I understand that some of the issues that the association and neighbors have raised will be dealt with at the site plan level. And I just want to raise one of them, and that is the plans for water retention and stormwater in particular. So can staff just acknowledge concerns they've heard thus far and indicate that these matters will be addressed through the site plan application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, staff have engaged with engineering staff as well. So we were submitted a stormwater management brief. The site does have capacity to deal with stormwater management, and we'll be looking at the specifics and values and methodologies in the site plan control process.
Okay, and will that also include the integrity of the culvert that abuts this property
That is something we can look at as well.
as part of site plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have a question, but well, maybe I do have a question. I know we've had inner urban transects where we've had reduction in parking to 0. Is this the first outer urban, or have there been others before it? I guess, or in general, how unusual or how novel is this to have 0 parking for a mid-rise out of the urban core?
Chair, some recent examples, I think this year, 330 Wheelboard was a 40-unit development with only 3 visitors parking that was supported by staff and approved by this committee. Another one was 15 outlets. It's a conversion of existing building to a rental unit, a total of over 200 residential units, and only 20 vehicle parkings were provided. So that's some preliminary digging we did when we were reviewing this application. It is true that in the suburban and perhaps outer urban area, that's start to come to request more reductions in parking.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think this location makes sense. We're often really focused on LRT stations, but this is in proximity to an already reasonably rapid route and then future plans for an upgrade. So it is a good location. Thanks for that context.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. This, the elevation of this building looks exactly like another one we approved for the west on baseline earlier in the year. But that's just a side comment. There is a little pathway that helps. It's not so much a pathway; it's a little bit chunk of sidewalk in the median that helps people get to the transit bus stop. That's on the north side of baseline right now. As part of the site plan, would it be appropriate, rather, as part of the site plan to explore improvements to that, so that people can, let's say, coming from Carleton or the O train, can get off the bus, cross baseline relatively safely to get to the building?
So, Chair, the commitment or requirement from towards the developer is according to the development charge, like a bus stops or major infrastructure that are the responsibility of the city. So typically we would not require the private developers to contribute to that, especially this one's a very small development. But the site plan process will ensure the integrity of the system and the connection of the pathway or sidewalks so that the development will support the connectivity to the city infrastructure and such as bus stops.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
That's an informal crossing, I take it. Okay. I don't see any other questions for staff. I don't remember that we have any amending motions on this one, so. Oh, we do have an amending motion. Thank you.
Which I've already read.
Which you've already read. And that was the one where it's like the writing says no more than 10 units, but the intention was to make sure it had more than 10 units. So technical. Okay. Is the amending motion carried? And is the motion as amended carried? Thank you very much. Thank Thank you very much, Craig, for your work on that. Office to residential conversions. So I know we have a presentation from staff. There are delegations. I imagine there will be a lot of questions. There is a motion that I want to make sure gets on the table at the outset of the meeting, just so everyone is aware of it. And I believe Vice Chair Gower is reading that in. Oh, Councillor Troster is reading that in. It's your motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Although I must give credit to Vice Chair Gower for assistance with drafting this motion along with staff. Whereas cash in lieu of parkland funds are collected as the payment of funds equivalent to the value of the amount of land that the city would otherwise have been entitled to require to be conveyed for park purposes as part of a development. And whereas the city is not meeting its approved parkland targets inside the Greenbelt, and the Parks and Recreation Master Plan notes that downtown Transect is the most undisturbed area from a parks and facilities perspective, and it is not recommended that CIL be waived or reduced as part of report ACS 2023-pregen 0010, and where it would be possible under exemption section 11(2)I or L of the Parkland Dedication Bylaw for the city to forgo collection of CIL funds as part of a negotiation with the applicant for an alternative public benefit in partnership with the city. And whereas Ward 14 includes downtown with the most amount of office vacancies in the city, and the ward councillor has indicated support for a pilot that would forgo in part CIL. And whereas there are transit and economic development benefits to facilitating rapid conversions of office to residential downtown core, to add more supply of housing to meet the city's housing pledge and the housing accelerator fund targets. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to implement a financial incentive pilot program for office to residential conversions with the following parameters. 1, that staff be delegated authority for office to residential conversion projects to reduce the applicable cash in lieu cap to 8%, allocated from the ward-specific CIL portion and not citywide, on the condition that the building permit for the project is issued within 6 months from site plan approval, date of issuance of the delegated authority report, with possibility of a singular extension of 3 months. That the eligible geographic area of the pilot be limited to Ward 14, that the eligibility of the program require the downtown vacancy rate to be above 10%, as reported in the latest Ottawa office market report by Colliers, and that the pilot be limited to a period of 2 years, after which it must be reconsidered by council. Be it further resolved that staff convene a meeting of developers and landowners to further explore the potential impact of additional financial incentives and report back to Planning and Housing Committee in Q1 2024. Thank you. Would you like me to speak to this or after everything?
Why don't we speak to it afterwards?
Yep.
But I think it's important to have that on the table, and I just want to confirm that copy of that motion's been sent to all the members, Kelly. Yeah, doing it right now. And do our friends in the gallery have a copy of that? We'll try to ensure that the media get that as well. So with that, I will ask for a presentation from Alexandre. We're in your hands, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll pass it over to my my manager, Charmaine, to give opening remarks first, and then after that, I'll take on the presentation.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Chair and Planning Committee members for the opportunity to speak to the report before you today. This was a cross-departmental effort, and I would like to thank my colleagues in PRED, IWSD, RCFS, and CCSD and Legal Services for their expertise and participation in this project. Additionally, I would like to thank the industry members who met with staff to discuss their experience in recent office to residential conversions. This helped formulate the recommendations. And now I will pass it over to Alex LeBlanc, the report lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charmaine, and thank you very much, community members, for being here today and listening to our presentation on office to residential conversion. So next slide, please. So staff were directed via motion in February 2023, so by Councillor Troster as well as Mayor Sutcliffe, to review office to residential conversion. So the objective of that motion was for us to streamline our internal processes, also take a look at the potential financial incentives and link those to affordable housing, as well as take a look at potential efficiencies in the capital acquisition
So in terms of framing the conversation about what we're looking at today, a healthy rate of office vacancies in a city is around 10%, and a healthy rate of housing vacancies around 3%. So in the Ottawa context, we're currently at a 2.1 residential vacancy rate as of January 2023. So as you know, we're in a housing crisis, so there is market demand for more residential units. And we're at 12.6% citywide office vacancy rate as of Q3 2023, with 14.2% downtown. Between 2013 and 2022, over 900 units have been created from non-residential to residential conversion. So that would include office, schools, and hotels as well. And then of that 900 units, 700 units were from actual office to residential conversions. Let's go on to the next slide. So a recent example that you'll recall having reviewed the zoning for is 473 Albert. This was an 11-story office building that was converted in 2021 towards 158 units. Next slide, please. Another fairly recent example, this one is pre-COVID, so in 2018, so we have another 11-story building that is at the corner of Rideau and King Edward that was transitioned to 194 units. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the recommendations that are before you today, this is a result of the cross-departmental team as well as input from industry, and there are 6 recommendations that are part of the report. The first one, staff proposed a change of procedure that would waive the official plan amendment application fees of about $30,000, so that they're waived for conversions if they're supported by staff. In the very rare instances that they would occur, official plan amendment applications for conversions would only require a planning rationale document. Any conversion that require an official plan amendment are expected to be paired with a zoning bylaw amendment. And speaking of zoning bylaw amendment, for the second recommendation, we're proposing a amendment of the zoning bylaw, and it's to ensure that buildings outside of industrial zones that are office buildings, schools, places of worship, or hotels, that the existing building gets essentially grandparented into the existing zoning going forward. So whatever is there would be permitted to go forward without an application. It effectively removed that requirement, especially if there's no stories or new height added. The implementation text of that zoning amendment would be through the Q1 2024 Omnibus Zoning Bylaw Amendment Report. This is expected to reduce the number of zoning applications for conversions, providing savings of time, so the 90 days of zoning application, as well as the application fee, which is between $13,000 and $26,000, depending on whether it's a minor or major zoning bylaw amendment. In terms of the third recommendation, staff views site plan control application for conversions with no additions or new stories as relatively low complexity files, given the limited scope of the changes. A scoped list of minimum required materials was developed specific for office residential projects, and staff would retain the authority to request additional studies and plans depending on the scope of the application, if the entrance is being renovated or there's changes to the access to the site, for example. Recognizing the lower complexity of files, staff proposed charging the standard fee of $22,000 instead of the complex fee of $54,000, which represents savings of roughly $30,000. Go to the next slide, please. The next recommendation speaks to having the general manager of the Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Department send a letter to the province to look at record of site condition exemptions to facilitate the process of office residential conversion. Record of site conditions, a provincial requirement that looks to confirm and remediate existing contaminants on site. It has been raised by industry stakeholders as a very costly and time-consuming part of site plan control, and this recommendation speaks to that concern specifically to engage with the province. The next recommendation speaks to an update, and it's quite well detailed in the report. And staff looked at options and to include some different ways of doing stormwater management requirements for office to residential conversions to reduce that requirement going forward, especially if the pre and post flow are equal on site. So if there's no change to building, not to overburden our industry partners. And the expectation for, it also sets the expectation for information exchange for network capacity so that the development industry can confirm whether a project is viable or not on the onset of their project, and committing to look at sanitary storage solution as part of an upcoming review of policy. The sixth recommendation speaks to the financial mechanism that were reviewed in the context of office to residential conversions, and I'll be speaking to those on the next slides. Next slide, please. So what we thought would be important to highlight on this slide is the impact of city initiatives. So we've already talked about the official plan amendment fees and the zoning bylaw amendment fees. So those are listed there. But we also wanted to provide an example to quantify what that 90-day carry cost would be. So in terms of a hypothetical example for committee to consider, for a $20 million property held at a 6% interest rate, that would represent about $23,000 a week, resulting in about $296,000 in savings that would be of costs that would not be incurred due to a city process. So that is a significant contributor. The next one is the site plan control fee. So we talked about that $30,000. And then we also wanted to highlight the stormwater management measures. This is going to vary by project, but this is also something that was raised as a cost by industry. We also wanted to highlight that in recent weeks, the federal government, and I believe just this morning, the province has given the official announcement that they're following suit. There's going to be a GST rebate for construction of residential units. So in terms of what that might look like for an eligible $50 million project creating 132 units, for example, should the province match the federal government's proposal, this would represent about $6.5 million in savings. That represents a value of HST, which is quite significant. Next slide, please. So in terms of the financial consideration of this report, no spending is recommended in this report. Each funding stream was reviewed with the lens to link any incentive to affordable housing. So we took a look at development application fees, and those are not substantial enough to be able to be linked to an affordable units on site. Development charges are currently credited in our bylaw for office to residential projects, so they would not apply in most cases. The community benefits charges, because the gross floor area of the office building is not expanding, the provincial calculation does not apply. In terms of cash in lieu of parkland, we did take a look at that piece, and two issues have been identified. The city is currently not meeting its approved target in downtown core in terms of parks and facilities, and the current method of collection and allocation of cash in lieu of parkland funds does not adequately direct money to the areas and projects where the identified need is greatest. So that means that the current assets are not being adequately renewed under the current funding model. Then we took a look at the incentive funds similar to Calgary, because we've heard that quite a bit in the media as well as from our stakeholders. We reviewed the Calgary model of using reserves as incentives, and in consultation with finance services, this is not a recommended approach. And then in terms of affordable housing, the funds that are currently allocated towards the affordable housing pre-development pipeline, which are shovel-ready nonprofit housing projects that would offer permanent affordable units. So this money is not allocated towards this at this point. So this sums up the financial recommendation as well as the total of the recommendation. So I'd be happy to answer any questions after delegation.
Thank you very much, Alex. We have three public delegations. I'm just wondering, Vice Chair Gower, Alex mentioned the provincial rebate on the GST. You've read that announcement. Can you just quickly give us some color on that?
Well, yeah, based on the announcement this morning, the province has announced that they're removing the provincial portion of the HST on qualifying new purpose-built rental housing. So it looks like they are mirroring exactly what the federal government had announced a few weeks back. So staff's report says 6.5 million in savings based on the federal portion. So presumably the provincial portion would add even more than that. So it's a substantial, but I think we'll ask some of the delegations today too, what kind of an impact that has on viability of these projects.
Thank you very much, Glenn. That's useful. And Councillor Troster, did you want to talk about your motion at this point and indicate what that's all about?
Sure, I'm happy And thank you so much to Vice Chair Gower for working on it with me. So we're kind of in a unique position in Somerset Ward, as you know. You saw the statistics that generally speaking, our office vacancy across Ottawa is 12%, downtown core in general is 14%. And I would argue that the specific area in North Centertown that we're really looking to micro target is probably closer to 20 or higher. And we know these buildings, many of them are empty government buildings that are now sitting and have some of them have become derelict, and it's led to a lot of concerns in the neighborhood. I have a lot of residents in Somerset Ward, specifically in that part of Centertown, who are desperate for more services or for services to return that left during the pandemic because we simply don't have the foot traffic. We're missing about 80 to 100,000 people on a daily basis in the downtown core. And this also has a huge impact on transit, which Vice Chair Gower can speak to as well. So there are huge advantages to office to residential conversions. And we're also, even though we have the lowest amount of parkland in Somerset Ward in the National Capital Region, we also are very cash and lieu rich because we have so many developments that can't convey land and that give us money. So it's no secret that Somerset Ward has the highest balance right now in CIL. So that's why I'm willing to consider a modest incentive for a very short period of time, specifically in Somerset Ward, to see if it does make a difference in terms of having some of those buildings be converted. But I think we have to have no illusions about this. This is not affordable housing. In some cases, it's luxury housing. But as far as I'm concerned, people in a building is better than no people in a building. And we're looking at the general vitality of the downtown core. So I agree with staff. We should not be taking money from the Affordable Housing Fund for this. I don't think we should be pursuing a model like Calgary did, but I do think that having an 8% cap on CIL for 2 years in Somerset Ward, in addition to the entire suite of recommendations that staff has put forward and these new tax decreases or exemptions from the federal and provincial government, I think that's actually a really nice financial package. I wouldn't want to see us putting taxpayer dollars to incent a project that's already going to happen. We had this conversation about the airport hotel. And as it turns out, that hotel is still being built. So, you know, I think by doing a very short-term pilot in one ward, we can see if that creates a tipping point for the viability of some projects, which is why I'm open to considering it. I know that our development partners were asking for a complete CIL exemption, and that's just not on the table as far as we're concerned. So Councillor Gower can speak more to the motion that we worked on together, but I think this creates a happy medium and the opportunity to experiment a little bit in the part of the city where we really need to see these conversions happen. Thank you.
Thank you. With the benefit of that additional context on the motion, I'm going to turn to our public delegations, and then we'll have an opportunity to have some questions of staff and debate after that. So our first public delegation today is Josie Tavares. Good morning.
Morning.
You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Thank you. So good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Josie Tavares, and I'm delegating on behalf of CLV Group Developments. So first of all, we'd like to thank staff for undertaking this study, and we'd also like to recognize and show appreciation to the staff working on our current office conversion at 360 Laurier Avenue West. Staff have been very responsive, helpful, and collaborative. As we know, conversions are an important piece of the puzzle to help revitalize old and vacant office buildings, particularly in our downtown. And it is one of the many solutions needed to help with the ongoing housing crisis. We think it's important to comment on what's been presented to committee by staff, since we do have some experience in conversions. We've also submitted a written delegation. Next slide, please. These are just some of the positive things that we have addressed in more detail in the written delegation, so I won't spend any more time on them. Next slide, please. I'll get into the crux. We are proposing 2 possible solutions for staff and committee's consideration in the hopes that they will work with the development community in partnership. These solutions can be considered for a defined period of time, which will help to encourage conversions in the buildings that are vacant and less desirable. Parkland fees can be revisited every 3 to 5 years and to determine if they're still required or if the goal has been achieved. Ideally, the first option is the development community would appreciate if the parkland fee was just waived entirely. And I feel that this could be argued depending on the office to be converted. So waiving could occur in situations where a high amenity offering can be provided above the amenity requirement in the zoning bylaw, or if it is in a priority area where office vacancy is very high and conversions are needed. The high amenity offering will help to offset the residents added to the community and not further burden the surrounding parks, which is what the cash in lieu would be collected for. I would like to highlight that in both conversion projects that we've done, so 473 Albert and this new one 360, they have over 200 square meters of amenity beyond the requirement in the zoning bylaw, which is also more than the amount that would be dedicated when using the standard rate of 5%. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry. I think there's maybe the wrong one here, but that's okay. I'm going to just speak to, I understand that there's a motion on the table, and it's to cap the rate at 8%. And if that's 10% minus the amount paid at the construction. So, and as this would apply only if, a permit is pulled within 6 months. So I'm hoping that committee is open to a different approach, keeping in mind that, conversions have no land available to dedicate in most situations. So increasing the cash requirement from 5%, if they were required to dedicate, that is what would be provided. So you're providing 5%, and you're doubling it to 10% when cash in lieu is taken. It is inequitable, in my opinion, for an existing building, right? You're effectively doubling that requirement. So as a planner, I do recognize that cash in lieu of parkland and parkland is certainly an important piece of being mindful of the public interest, which is why we've thought of an alternative solution that we feel bridges the development community's interest and the public interest. As in planning, we know it's always about balance. So we propose that the standard 5% rate for cash in lieu be used and credit the 2% commercial amount, which has been paid at the time of construction to pay the delta of 3%. There is precedence in the parkland bylaw that would support this for residential uses. So there are 2 residential uses that use the standard 5%, and this includes a residential care facility and developments with 18 units per hectare or less. In terms of future review and next steps, this report is certainly a step in the right direction, but we definitely feel that more work can be done. We really encourage staff to work with the different levels of government and city departments to look for additional offsets for conversions. We're aware that the National Housing Accelerator Fund could be awarded in the near future, and this could unlock funds that help implement a per square foot offset. We're also thinking something to consider, maybe lobbying the province for funds, looking for within the city budget. It's important for cities to determine what priorities they want to support and invest to continue growth and vibrancy within a municipality. A further consideration that could be explored is waiving the office component of property tax during the planning and construction process up until occupancy, and that could be very helpful. We're also looking forward to the continuation of site servicing study and the creative solutions to assist with the aging infrastructure. And we would most certainly be happy to assist or provide feedback along the way with that. So that is everything. And I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask. I'd be more than willing to answer.
Thank you very much for your delegation. And I think you've raised some really good points. So I wanted to ask you a couple things around additional incentives. So if we take the 473 Albert, staff have told me that the total cash in lieu payable on that was $564,000. Let's assume we were to rebate all of that. So $500,000. What does that do? Does it allow you to move faster? Does it allow more affordability? What would you do with that extra $500,000? How does that affect the project?
Yeah, of course. Through you, Chair. Any cost savings that can be achieved, it's simple. It reduces the cost for the end user, right? It's a less of a rent later down. The less cost that we have on our project, that has a direct result to, lower rents in the future. And it's just as simple as that. Any cost that we can get on any front, any offsets, it's all going to help.
And in terms of the provincial announcement today for the additional rebate on HST, have you had a chance to look at that? I assume this kind of project would apply, but what kind of impact? That'd be well over $6 or $7 million. What kind of impact does that have on these projects?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to take a look at what's been put forth today or this morning, but I imagine that our team is kind of working through everything. And what I can do is I'd be more than happy to provide a comment forward from the finance team. I'm a planner. I don't necessarily deal with all the pro formas and all that, but I certainly can speak to my team and provide an update to committee.
Okay, yeah, and you've raised a couple points in your delegation. I think one of them I hadn't heard before as an idea. And this is exactly what Councillor Troster's motion speaks to. I think there is an opportunity to look at the additional incentives. We would like to sit down with developers and get a better understanding of the challenges and what the impact would be from additional city or other incentives. So to be continued, I hope. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for being here, Josie. I don't think we've met, but I have certainly met a number of your colleagues, and I did tour the Slate building, the Albert Street conversion. It really is quite beautiful. I guess the issue for me is if we provide an incentive, I think it needs to do one of two things. It needs to either get a developer sort of there to make the decision yes or no about whether to convert a building, or it needs to have real savings in terms of rents that'll actually filter down to tenants. And so you mentioned that any of these savings will make the building less expensive, potentially make rents less expensive. Would you be willing to have some sort of condition included with a deeper subsidy that those savings would be passed directly onto tenants?
I'm not sure what that would look like and how it transformed down. I think at the end of the day, what we all really need to be mindful and keep, our climate in terms of development is looking a lot different these days than it did. So even when we did 473 Albert, that was sort of a pre-inflation time where costs were a lot less. So we're seeing costs exponentially increase here, and it will certainly filter down to the residents. But again, we kind of just need to take a look at what our models look like. And I think it naturally will happen. Like I know in development, and this is just speaking from like a planning outlook, like I'm not a financial or by any stretch, but it's a demand that we need is housing. So if you add more supply, I think naturally we're all going to see the effects on rents, on housing prices, really simply put. But we have a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges and a lot of costs that are really making it difficult to put more housing into the market. And I think that's really what we're struggling with.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I asked the same question to your colleagues by email, and I'll be honest with you, I'm unconvinced that a pure supply argument is really going to make a difference in terms of rents in the downtown core, and the rents at the Slate are high. And the apartments are beautiful, there's no question. And so given the choice between no housing and expensive housing, I'd like to see housing, but we really want the best bang for our buck when it comes to any sort of financial incentive to developers. So for me, what is the most convincing is if something would create that tipping point to decide to develop or not. Otherwise, we got to be really cautious with taxpayer money here. And there's just not a huge appetite for a subsidy that would ultimately make a project more profitable for a developer, but not necessarily filter down to the people who live there. So I do appreciate this conversation. I think we're trying to find the right mechanism. I think what's in my motion is fairly modest to begin with, but it does stipulate that we want staff to keep talking to the development community to see if we can go further, or if there's something we can look at on a case by case basis, if there's a development or a building that a builder is really on the fence about.
Through you, the chair, I think one of the things that are important to note too is very recently there was office conversion potential project at 110 O'Connor, and the developer chose not to go forward with it. And maybe that's that tipping point that you're talking about, Ariel, like, or Councillor Troster is these sorts of offsets can help encourage those more. Like, sure, we did 360 Laurier and we purchased it and we went forward with it, but we purchased that with having started those conversations with the city and truthfully thinking that some offsets would filter down in the time that we started those conversations back in February to now, and we really believe in this cause. So we went ahead and, closed on it anyways, because we want to be part of the solution in the downtown.
Thank you so much. So I was wondering, Josie, and thank you for being here. I understand we're speaking a lot about the downtown core right now, but office to residential conversions can apply anywhere. And I'd like to understand from your perspective what this report might offer to further incentivize the office to residential conversions that we'd like to see in other parts of the city that are also looking to grow.
Through the chair, I mean, frankly, our focus has really been the downtown. We're seeing that as an area that we want to support and we want to bring back liveliness to. We want to improve the LRT ridership. We want to support those local businesses. We're really looking for that animation in the downtown. So for us as a company, we've put a lot of our efforts into it, and a part of the city that we really want to revitalize, and we feel like there's a real problem with. Not to say that we wouldn't consider other areas of the city, but I'm not sure that I can necessarily speak too much to it. I think I think that there's some good things in the report that will help, but I think a lot of the focus will be on the downtown for right now, and that's what we're looking to maybe add some areas where Councillor Troster said that in the Somerset ward maybe this motion is only specifically for that, and then once we've kind of solved that, I think it'll kind of trickle out and have some positive impacts on the surrounding areas as well. But yeah, like I said, we've really focused our efforts in the downtown for now. Not to say in the future we wouldn't do something different, but that's sort of where we've led.
Okay, great. Well, just to remind those that are paying attention to this conversation, it wouldn't be necessarily up to my discretion how Councillor Troster would manage her CIL accounts in a downtown core. I don't think that would be appropriate for me to define. But certainly I think the purpose of, and I was definitely careful to check that this report applied to a citywide effort to create vitality within these buildings. And there are other parts of the city that are looking for investment. And I would be loath to not mention Bell's Corners, which has some government buildings that the residents and businesses there are really interested in seeing move forward. And we have a great potential for a Main Street as well. So we are looking for partners from the development community to take a chance and to have a vision for other parts of the city as well. And this could be a great opportunity, especially with the announcements coming from the provincial and federal governments, to start thinking about, many local small economies that could support transit, that could support small businesses across the city. So I look forward to those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your delegation today. Who would have thunk, even 5 years ago, we'd be talking about converting buildings to residential, and we're all kind of learning together. I think a lot of your points, even, Councillor Troster has a point, if it creates incentive to speed it up and say, yeah, we need housing and we're going to build. I'm less concerned about the CIL factor if it's going to lead to speed, just like the fact that we have our own job to do with, and this is no slight to planning. We're overtaxed, we're overworked on getting permits and things going too. We got to find a way to get these built and built quick. So, this announcement that just came out, I don't want to say bombshell announcement, but a good announcement today. Between now and council, I think there's probably a good opportunity to collect some of those financials. And look, some of the bigger developers in the city, Claridge Homes being one of them, said they won't touch any of these. They're very, very expensive to convert. It's not easy. So there is, I do feel for you from that perspective, but at the same time, I think there's got to be some kind of benefit to reducing or eliminating any kind of CIL, and it would be the need for speed. If this would lead to the need for speed, this would be a very different discussion versus somebody occupying a building and saying, mortgage rates are a little high right now. We're gonna wait a little bit longer. We're gonna wait a year, sit on the land for 2 years. But if it gave the opportunity where you have to take the higher cost to build quicker, I'd be inclined to support that. And also to follow up on Councillor Johnson, being in the outer urban. I have some of these projects coming down the pipe that I know of where they're literally, we got to treat them separately. It's a new world for us where we have an office building and we have parks all around the building. There's no room. And I would like to see some more amenities in the local parks, splash pads, things like that. But you can't treat every single opportunity like inner urban versus outer urban versus maybe there would be some suburban towers somewhere the same way. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents, and maybe if you can give me some feedback. And is that a possibility that you can go back to your finance team? I appreciate you're not the finance team, but about, grease lightning style proposals and what this could look like with the new GST rebate being added before council.
Through the chair, and I'll speak to just sort of the speedy nature of these types of developments. And so, you know, at the end of the day, we're working with an existing footprint, and so they're complicated. Each one is unique. So we try to be go as quick as we can, because as we know, with inflation, there's this smaller margin here, right? So we've gone through as quickly as possible, and these definitely go. This current one we have, particularly from the SPA perspective, I think staff's done a really good job of pushing us through that quickly, and I definitely appreciate it. And I think that there is that opportunity to make these go very quickly. But with that, and then that's because of the margins that we have. We're certainly open to looking at other areas of the city as a means to do office conversions as well. But a lot is riding on this particular project, and offsets that we receive on this one will just help us be able to do more. And if we're not, kind of in that financial good place with this one, we may not necessarily be able to do more of them. So there is a lot riding on it, I think, for everybody. And I think that's just a fair statement to make, right? So, we're really hoping that everybody can work together and we can put our heads. It's a partnership, it's never just one side problem to solve. Like, we have areas of our city that I think we can all see that an office conversions would be beneficial for. And I think if we just kind of put both sides together, the development community and the city, I mean, the solutions are endless, and we all have the same goal and vision. So I think it would be great.
Thank you for your delegation today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Josie. I'm wondering, in terms of the size of the units that you're proposing to build, one of the things that I'm wondering is if you're encouraging, like, for families to come into the downtown as well. We don't forget about that. And if some of the units are going to be larger, that would be helpful to make the downtown more livable.
Through the chair, we certainly have larger units. We had them at 473 Albert, and we will have them at 360 Laurier. So we have a range for all sort of life stages. There's 1 bedrooms, 1+ dens, 2 bedrooms, 2+ dens. So we certainly are offering for kind of all those life stages.
Thank you. I appreciate Councillor Gower pointing out about the HST removal by the province this morning. That was just sent out. And so obviously you got developers are going to catch up on that. It sounds like it would make a big difference. And my concern is, since this is not about affordable housing, that's been made very clear. I want to make sure that we're not taking away from affordable housing, because that needs to be built. And these conversions, as Councillor Troster said, housing is housing. We need housing. And it's great to have those buildings converted. However, I just want to make sure that we're not using funds for affordable housing that's earmarked for that, because that's an issue. So is it more helpful to, is it just as helpful to just speed up, like by having some of the processes sped up for developers in this? I think that would be, time is money.
And through the chair, certainly faster processes is always going to make a difference. We feel that, some of what's being proposed in the report today will, from an entitlements and planning process, will help to speed things up. I've yet to take one of these through with the new sort of pre-consultation process that's in place. So I'm not really sure how that will factor into the process, but we did it pre that, but it's been really great working with staff. They have moved it very fast. So fingers crossed that the new pre-consultation phasing continues to keep that speedy nature, but it certainly, time is money, and being able to speed things up and bring housing to the market, I think, is the goal of everybody on this call.
I'm aware that the province minister actually has said to me that they're interested in these conversions. They think they're a great idea. I spoke to him last week, but I just got to make sure that it's not mixed in with affordable housing funding, and that it's a separate stream specifically for these conversions. So it's something I think developers can speak directly on their lobbying to the province, but that's my top concern. So we'll do what we can, and certainly work with my colleague who have these buildings. The only government building I have is D&D, and I don't think anyone's going to convert that into housing right now. But we'll will work together on looking at possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Josie, I don't see any other questions for you, so thank you very much for the intervention today. And the Laurier property is delightful. It's
Exciting one for sure.
Thank you. We have two more delegations members. Marco Mazusevic is up again, and then Kelly Rodenizer. Marco, another 5 minutes.
Hi. Thank you again. I promise this is the last time I'll bother you all. Yeah, I really love the idea of converting, where appropriate, offices to residential places. There's, as was mentioned by a couple councillors, there are a lot of struggling businesses downtown due to the lack of office workers coming in. I think this would be a great way to help revitalize those areas. People living in proximity of a lot of those shops can make use of them, and there's a ton of great shops downtown that I would very, very much be sad to lose. And I really hope that this would be one step towards keeping a lot of them downtown. Obviously, we should only be doing conversions where fiscally possible, and I think streamlining a lot of the processes will help more of them be fiscally possible. I like what Councillor Trosser mentioned about affordable housing, and I think it is very important to keep that in mind while looking through some of the documentation. I believe I saw our definition of affordable housing seems to be average market rent, which I slightly disagree with. I think it's kind of an absurd way to define affordable housing, is that we all acknowledge we're in an housing crisis right now. So to define the average as the affordable housing seems a little bit ridiculous. I think we should try to strive for better definitions of affordable housing that will hopefully be tied to either minimum wage or maybe the bottom 20th percentile of wages in our city. I think those would be a lot more reasonable ways to define affordable housing if we're going to then use waiving of fees to help places build affordable housing. I think we could be very optimistic with what we define it as, and I think setting it as average market rent is a little bit too high in my opinion. Yeah, I definitely I can agree that we should try to keep in mind that the cash in lieu for things like parks and stuff is very important. I would be very sad to not have parks in my area. I live in the downtown Councillor Trosser's ward, and there are a ton of great parks that I appreciate having there, and I would be very sad for other people in their areas to not have to be able to experience that. Lots of places to read during the summer and have trees and stuff, and I think this is all very important to keep in mind, and we shouldn't remove these fees if we're going to then end up having, no either affordable housing or very important things that we should get in place of that. But yeah, I think as long as we're keeping in mind a lot of these things that people in the areas would need, and hopefully this can expand to not just the urban core, but other parts of the city as well. But obviously, as the first delegate mentioned, the urban core is probably the place that's going to see a lot of these conversions. And for the moment, I think that's probably the place where it's most feasible to do. But yeah, obviously overall, I think this is a great idea. More housing is great, and this will be one step in that direction as well. And thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your comments. I don't see any questions for you from members, so thank you very much for making that presentation. Kelly Rodenizer will be our last delegate on this issue.
Chair, can you hear me? It's Kelly Rodenizer.
I can hear you, Kelly. Your
I
camera's
would like
on.
I would like to apologize to all of committee. I have an 11:30 medical appointment that I've been waiting for a month that I can't miss. So I'm in the car, hands free, but I just had a couple comments if you don't mind through
Please
you,
do.
Chair. Okay, so I'm Kelly Rodenizer with the regional group. I'm the Vice President of Commercial and Multifamily Development. We have property in the Vanier area in Ward 12 that are existing office buildings that we've been actively looking to convert. So I've been on the SWOT analysis team with Alex and his colleagues. I think it's amazing the progress that we have made through this. When I looked in 2020 of converting this office building that's on 282 Dupuy into residential, it was extremely challenging, and the planning process was making it even longer. So the ways that we've made the changes or they're being proposed, I think are fantastic. But I agree with everything that CLV has said with Jose in her presentation. The one thing I wanted to ask council if they could direct back to staff is the HST GST. I know those numbers just came out this morning. We looked back at projects that we are actively building, and we are receiving, it's the cost of the combined GST and HST is about $36,000 a unit. So I'm not sure that that 6.5 million that Alex quoted is correct for 135 units, as it includes both the HST and GST. So I just wanted to flag that to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Kelly. We'll ask Alex for some clarification when we get to staff. Is that the conclusion of your remarks?
Yes.
Councillor Vice Chair Gower has a question for you.
Thanks, Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm glad we could squeeze you in before your appointment. And I know you wrote a letter to committee as well, which was helpful. I wanted to ask you for a full rebate of cash in lieu for a project like the one you mentioned on Dupree. It would probably result in several $100,000 of a rebate. What would that money do for you?
Correct. And it would be the critical tipping point. Right now, this project at 282 Dupuy does not need an OPA or a rezoning. It's just site plan. And I can't make the project is not financially feasible at this time. And the projects right now are so tight with interest rates being at 8.5%. And construction costs in the last 4 years for similar projects have gone up between $100 and $150 a square foot of buildable, which is also significant. So any additional costs, we were hoping the reduction in the CIL would actually tip us over to be able to pull the project. This building has sat vacant for 5 years, and we aren't able to lease it. We would love to convert it, and we just can't make the numbers work. And as your colleagues have already said, conversions are very challenging to do. You don't know what's going to happen until you open up those walls. So the margins are very thin and very challenging.
Okay, thank you. I hope the HST rebate makes a difference. And I think the door, as I said earlier, to representative from CLV, the door is certainly open for council to look at additional incentives, and looking forward to having a further discussion with you and some of your colleagues in the development industry to make sure we are setting good policy on this. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I don't see any further questions for you from members. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon or this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So colleagues, that's the end of our public delegations. The opportunity is now to ask questions of staff, starting with Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I had different briefings on this, my understanding was the argument is the cash in lieu amount should be zero, not what's proposed here in this amendment, but should be zero because that was already paid at the time. This is not a new build. The cash in lieu would have been paid. So my question is, whenever these buildings were built, was there even such a thing as cash in lieu? Cash in lieu, was it actually paid?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So what I can tell you is that the authority to collect CIL for such developments goes back to 1983. So those developments that would have qualified would have paid unless there are some periods of time where fees, including CIL, were waived in the downtown core of the city of Ottawa.
But none of these buildings are that young, are they? 1983, they would be older than 1983.
I can't comment on that, but some of them would have been earlier than that as well. Yeah.
Okay, so that argument that's been given to us is not actually accurate. So then I move to the other part of this is that just on principle, I mean, I use my cash in lieu. So the councillors that have these high cash in lieu amounts, what can they do with this money other than build a park where there's no land to build a park? So, I mean, it sits there. So what can they actually do with that if they did get more money now from these buildings?
Thank you, Council. I'll pass it to my colleague, Kevin Wary, who's going to be able to speak to the cash in lieu parkland and its use.
Thank you, Alex, and through you, Mr. Chair. Cash in lieu of parkland funds aren't limited to construction. That actually can be used to purchase lands for park development as well. The chair has actually completed a couple such transactions within his ward over the last year or so. So accumulating cash in lieu of parkland, particularly in denser areas such as Ward 14, where land values are also significantly more expensive than, say, Ward 4. It is the value of the actual cash in lieu account can quickly be diminished should we get a property that we could actually purchase for park development instead of doing improvements to existing parks and facilities.
All right, and these, I can't actually ask the counselor, right? I mean, I would like to know if there is some kind of plan, you know, for a purchase of something. I appreciate the land is very expensive, and that it sits there, you try to accumulate it. But I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, in committee, can we have a counselor from the area comment on what her general plans are?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate to let Councillor Crosser respond.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Councillor Curry. Yes, so we are looking at purchasing land for pocket parks. We don't have anything solidified yet, but we are keeping an eye on some lots where we have possibility. We can't buy large swaths of land, but we can add green space tucked into areas where there's very little. So that's something we're looking at. And we're also looking at some, you know, we have aging infrastructure downtown. So we're looking at adding water fountains, misting stations, shade structures. This summer, we're upgrading the basketball court at St. Luke's Park. That's, you know, ready for life cycle improvement, but we're able to upgrade it to something that the community can actually use better. Lots of requests for lighting in older parks that don't have lighting at night. But I will say we are sort of CIL rich in Centertown for a lot of reasons, which is why I'm willing to explore a very short-term pilot that would take some, you know, that would take a little bit less for CIL for projects that involve conversion. And I had the exact same questions as you, Councillor Curry, because I was like, well, if land was already conveyed or if CIL was already paid, I see no reason to pay it again. But there's no evidence that it was actually paid for the buildings in question in Centertown. So it's really tricky. And we're just trying to figure out like what would be the tipping point for a particular development to go from it sitting empty to having people in it, because that's the value proposition. And I'm not sure if a couple $100,000 is going to really make the difference. So it's a tough conversation.
No, I hear you. And I think everyone is trying to make it work, see what the best way to make it work is. It is good timing that we heard from the province today, but that's also confusing to us now because we sort of think, what is the impact, right? Is that what you guys were just talking about? No, because that I find like, you know, the question I have, I guess, is to staff. What do you think the real impact of this will be? This, when the GST was announced, developers were on the radio saying that was a game changer. Like that has changed the world for them, that projects that were on hold were now coming forward. I understand these are not the same as some of those buildings we're talking about that are, you know, from the ground up. This is a different kettle of fish for sure. But what do we think is the real impact of this?
Thank you, Councillor. So one of the things that I would like to address, I'll take the opportunity, is during my presentation, I offered a hypothetical example of what the GST would look like, and I just wanted to reconfirm that number. So the number that I had used was, and I apologize for any confusion, is the 6.5 million for assuming a $50 million construction, and that would be the value of the whole of the HST. So both the provincial and the federal tax combined. This was based on the Minister Calandra at a few months back when the GST was announced federally. He had committed on Twitter that the province would follow suit. So now we have the formal announcement this morning that the province is following suit. So we had anticipated that.
Okay, because I think when we were listening to developers, they were only talking GST. So I feel like the HST is a significant thing. The other question I have, maybe somebody else is going to ask this, but one presenter offered, you know, the 5%, the 3 and the 2. And I wondered if staff had a comment on that recommendation.
For that, I'll pass it over to Kevin Wary, my colleague, so as it affects the CIL funds.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor, could you please repeat the question?
Well, I'm wondering if you actually were on at the time when the presenter indicated that 5 would be 5% instead of the 10 or the 8 here that we're potentially talking about, but 5 instead.
Yes, I was on at the time. Through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies. I was listening at the time. I will point out that actually the parkland dedication bylaw, as it stands today, had we had the 473 Albert application come in, it would have qualified at 25%. However, the province has brought that down to 10%. The 5% is a number that applies within the parkland dedication bylaw. However, that applies to low density. For instance, rural estate lot subdivisions is a great example of that, where in low density, it is assumed that there is green space per residential unit at a far greater provision rate than you would see in, say, a 15-story apartment building. So will the 5% make a difference? If I was to qualify my response, that would be a 50% reduction in the CIL applicable, or that we could use as revenue towards, for instance, upgrading a basketball court in St. Luke's Park, purchasing land and developing property at 1010 Somerset. These are all expensive proposals. They go from very, I would say, expensive from an RCFS perspective when I consider St. Luke's Park, because our budgets are very limited, to significant citywide expenditure when we think of things like 1010 Somerset. And that would be, on these types of applications, a 50% reduction in revenue for us to try and accomplish those goals.
Yeah, okay. I can do that math as well. But anyways, okay, well, thank you very much. I'll let other people ask questions.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. I've got some questions that are all over the place, so please bear with me. My understanding is that the fees that are charged for various applications are based on a cost recovery model within the planning department. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the first part of the staff recommendation that's before us talks about a waiver in few instances for an official plan amendment portion of the application fee. So despite staff saying this will only be a few instances, still going to be work involved. There's still going to be cost to the city. So how do you justify this waiver?
Through you, Chair. So the instances where a zoning bylaw amendment and an OPA would occur. So in the instance that there is an OPA, there would very likely be a zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay.
At that point, we would be going through that process through the zoning bylaw amendment. So the only document that we would require as part of the OPA is the planning rationale. So the work is already going to be underway.
Right,
so it's
enough.
combined.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you telling us, showing us the table with the various fees. That's very important for us to understand. Councillor Troster is moving something that is different. That's not part of what we do. Can you just speak to it directly, whether this is something that you support? If so, why? If not, why? Thank you.
I'll speak from the Fred perspective, and I'll let Kevin weigh in on the our CFS perspective. So from our department's perspective, we think there's merit in trying it on a limited basis, board specific, to see, as a councillor indicated, whether it helps move the needle on these projects. I'm sure I know Kevin likely has some issues with it, and I'll allow him to weigh in.
Thank you, Don. My perspective, please recall, I'm focused on what was the goals of the Parks Recreation Facilities Master Plan. We have a mandate to achieve. I'm concerned about the livability of downtown. When we're moving new people in and we're not providing them with any new or improved or enhanced opportunities, we are simply putting a lot more people in very big, tall buildings without amenity that we can provide affordably from a city's perspective. We look at whether it be vulnerable communities, trying to give them access to recreation. We have a reduced rate system we're doing right now. We actually have some free access systems, but I can't do that without the facility to actually provide it. So when we go and we discount things like cash in lieu of parkland or parkland dedication, we are discounting our ability to provide for that future population. So there is a short-term gain, but in my experience, from my point of view, it is a very long-term problem that we're just only feeding. And this is why you saw in the preamble that we do make particular mention that we are short on our delivery in Ward 14 in particular. And that is why you will see me discussing the need to continue with funding for these programs throughout.
Okay, I appreciate that. So the Troster motion part 1 specifically states to reduce the applicable SIL amount allocated from the ward specific portion and not citywide. So Kevin, why do you care then? Do I understand correctly that the funds that would be collected and directed to the city pot would not be touched?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Brockington is correct. The proposal is to reduce only the Ward 14 component, which represents today 60% of all funds received.
Okay.
However, we have ward-specific projects in mind, be they acquisition or improvements.
Fair enough. Okay, so I wasn't sure about this. I'm inclined to support the Troster motion because it's ward specific. She's well aware of the challenges of her ward. She's willing to make this a pilot. With all due respect, you have a healthy bank account in this regard. And I do believe that there may be some value in seeing what the results of the pilot will be. So generally, I'm a little uncomfortable, but I think given the parameters of the pilot, I will support this. I'll just say, Chair, I inherited a negative SIL balance when I came to office. And having just gone through the 2014 campaign, like everyone else, heard 1,001 things people would like in our parks changed or added or refreshed, and then have no SIL at all. It was negative, have to build that up to where it is now, about 1.6 million. And just on the record, I mean, I want to dedicate $1 million to the Alexander Community Center expansion. We're looking at a potential basketball court in Mooney's Bay, upgrades to kitchen at community center, and it's being very frugal over time, but there are some very dedicated projects that this money in my ward will be allocated to. But sometimes it takes time to accrue what you need to accrue to put that. Last thing I'll just say is I continue to be worried about the future of downtown and the lack of clarity about where we're going within our city. A huge component. I recognize that private property owners, whether you own a commercial building or any other type of building, you can apply to do what you want. You're a private property owner. You want to go from commercial office to residential, fantastic. We'll help to see that happen. But what's the long-term demand for office space in our downtown core? And what is the mixture? What's the true mixture that we would like to see in this downtown neighborhood? Yes, we want to see more residential, but we have to understand that there's a need for office space as well. So very keen to see the results of the studies that are going on now. I will be supporting the Troster motion, and I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Lowe.
Oh, I thought that was a question. Thank you, Chair. I think we keep talking about downtown revitalization, and this is one of the best. Was that me? And I think this is one of the best ways to finally achieve, or at least partly achieve, that goal. The cash in lieu portion is interesting to me because I look at everybody's accounts with envy when I'm looking at my $100,000 balance, 90% of which came from David Hill's account. But anyway, so when we're talking about that, and we're talking about suggesting an 8% cap, and I'm looking at the bylaw. One of the, if we're conveying cash in lieu of parkland, it's 1 hectare for every 500 dwelling units, and I don't know what that is the equivalent of in about 10%. Sorry, in percentage. And I'm wondering, given that these developers are
you know, have no choice but to convey cash, would we be amenable to something that's a little lower than that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll pass that question over to my colleague Kevin Laurier.
Thank you, Alex, and Mr. Chair. In response to Councillor Lowe, I would point out that when under the new provincial regulation, Building More Homes Faster Act, we are not collecting CIL at a rate of 1 hectare per 500 units. The province regulated it's at half of that, 1 hectare per 1,000 units. So we are artificially reduced on our CIL collection due to the legislation that came out last year. And so to expand upon that further, the cash value will change depending on each property, of course, because it's based on land valuation. So each one can come in at a different price.
Okay. And okay. So recognizing that you know, we're not changing the building footprint and we're streamlining the process to make things faster to help everything go a little faster. Would the mover be amenable to lowering the cap to something like a 5 or 4% even?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lowe. I mean, I'm really on the fence about this one, and I'll tell you because I don't think there's a lot of public appetite for a subsidy going directly to developers if it's not going to have an impact on the end price of housing for the user. And so my question is if that would make a significant difference in the tipping point for a developer to decide whether to proceed or not. And I think that's really, really tricky. And I think that's where the sweet spot is. And also I have tons of respect for Kevin for standing up for the lack of parkland in Centertown. I think what I'm proposing is quite modest initially, but there is a clause at the end that says, let's get staff to meet with the development community to see if we can push this further. I'm just not entirely convinced of what the dollar amount is that would be a tipping point for any given project. And I do think that these tax changes are quite significant that were announced today. So I'm inclined to wait to change that number. I would love to see support for this motion today and then a discussion in January based on a further meeting with the development community. I felt inclined to bring something forward because I think we can do a little more than what the staff report is recommending. But you can hear the skepticism in my voice. I'm just trying to figure out what the right tool is. And I think we all are, and I wouldn't want to rush it. And I also wouldn't want to, you know, I think I'm making this ward specific so it doesn't drain the funds of other wards that desperately need CIL money. And as Riley said, yeah, we have a lot of money in our cash and leave fund right now. But as soon as we want to buy something, land is very expensive, right? So that's kind of a muddled answer to say I would consider a further reduction if that is a recommendation that came jointly with staff and the development community in January, and we had a more fulsome discussion about it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a muddled answer to a very muddled question too. I'm trying to think of what to say as I'm saying it. So I think that's fair. I'm inclined to support it anyway, but I think that's fair. And perhaps when that report comes back, it will recommend a full waiver. It may recommend 3%, right? So let's do that and see what they come back with in the winter, I think you said. Cool. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think one thing as committee members we're weak on is our understanding of pro formas and the financing of these developments. Is staff planning to do an analysis on the GST and HST changes and what impact that may have overall on pricing and viability of new development?
Chair, so as part of the motion, should it pass, we'll definitely engage with our industry partners to get more information about the type of pro forma and like what the impact of those financials are. And should we be able to find something that's where they're reporting back, we'll certainly include that in that report.
But even outside of this office to residential, I mean, we're seeing so many changes in terms of legislation and HST, mortgage rates. Even more broader than that, is there any analysis or work being done for council?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, it's a point of discussion we have with the industry on a regular basis. The challenge is the industry does not tend to disclose their pro formas for commercial confidentiality reasons. So it is a difficult issue to pin down, but we're certainly willing to have continue to have those discussions in this context, as Alex had indicated. But there is nothing else on our work plan to that point.
Okay, even some lunch and learns, or even some direct opportunities for counselors to meet with developers, with lenders, I think it'd be really helpful. Anyways, I wanted to thank staff for their help on this motion over the last week. Thank you to builders and developers for their input, and thank you to Councillor Troster as well for taking the lead on this. I just wanted to talk quickly about data we have and data we don't have as it relates to policy here. So there's two excellent reports. There's Collier's, who do a quarterly report on rental vacancies and the overall office market. And there's the Canadian Urban Land Institute, who did a nationwide report about office to residential conversions. Both of these are referenced in the staff report, and both of them have some really interesting information. Across the city, our vacancy rate is 14.3%. In Q3 of 2023. Downtown is at 14%. Canada is at 17%, quite a bit higher. Interesting. Anything over 10% seems to be the critical point where that's bad. And we also have a very low residential vacancy rate, as you know. So Ottawa's in a sweet spot for these conversions. In fact, in a spot that the Canadian Urban Land Institute identifies that these conversions should happen naturally, may not even need incentive in many cases. But we are focused on Centertown and not Canada. Sorry, Kathy. That's okay. Because we need more people downtown. We need more offices. We need more people in offices, more people in homes. It certainly helps transit. Return to office rate citywide is 57%, but it's still at 42% downtown compared to pre-pandemic. So only 42% of office workers have returned to downtown. Citywide in Montreal, it's 81%. So we're still really struggling in Ottawa from that point of view. So the Canadian Urban Land Institute says there are 11 to 17 buildings downtown that are candidates for conversion, 11 to 17. What I don't know is how many of those 11 to 17 will be converted without any incentive whatsoever, even without this report. I suspect it's more, but we don't really know. And I think we've identified some goals today. We want to see more buildings converted more quickly, and ideally better affordability. But what I'm not sure about is what additional financial incentives from the city would actually do to achieve those three goals. So this is what the motion is pretty modest. It moves the cap from 10% to 8%, which is mostly just to address some fairness around record keeping and historical issues. So it's about that 473 Albert example that we've been talking about. It means an additional $113,000 out of their total of $564,000. So it's about $100,000. What does $100,000 do? What does $1 million do? Calgary does a minimum $3 million rebate. I don't think we're anywhere near that. Where does the funding come from? Is it through cash in lieu rebates, which has a serious consequence in terms of our parkland budgets? Could it come from the Housing Affordability Fund? Is it right to take it from there? That money might not then go to Ottawa community housing. So I think we do need to meet with the development industry. I think there could be a great justification for more incentives. What's the amount? What's the outcome? And are there conditions we need to attach to that? And right now we don't have the data we need to have good policy on this as it relates to cash incentives, but I think we can get there with a little bit more discussion, and a number of the delegations raised some great points today that we need to explore. So I hope everyone will support the motion and the overall package, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. The member for Laurier West in this.
Well, Councillor Gower just stole my whole speech. There we go. Hopefully that helps. Echoing. Is your own sound on? Yeah. There. Is that better? Oh, okay. Thank you. It was my fault.
I just wanted to, a lot of my questions have been asked. I wanted to say that I'm very much in favor of this report, and I'm actually very much in favor of the motion as well too. And, we often comment that the pandemic changed commuter behaviors. We haven't seen the return to work. We know that this has been a trend in our downtown core for much longer than the pandemic. We know that we've struggled with revitalizing areas like Spark Street and other adjacent areas, even the Byward Market. And the key to that is residential. It's bringing people into our core so they're there 24/7. It's what makes value in terms of opening up a business that supplies food or, home hardware pieces and, those small niceties that people who live in a community require access to without having to leave the community. And you can't have that when you only have people living or being in that area from 9 to 5. So I remember, and sorry, I'm going to wax poetic here. I remember when I was a kid and I came to Ottawa with my family because I grew up in Kitchener. And honestly, it was the most incredible experience. I absolutely loved it. And we were staying at a hotel just off of Spark Street. And we were shocked because the only restaurant we could find was a little, I think it was a little Chinese takeout in a building. Everything else had shut down. Now, I won't tell you how old I am, but you can assume that this was a while ago. Things have changed a lot. But still, we know that there's so much potential in our downtown core. And what we don't want is ghost buildings. We don't want empty facilities. We don't want to have that. I honestly don't know how many of those 11 to 17 buildings that Councillor Gower mentioned are going to be unlocked and turned into residential because of this report or because of the motion that's brought forward by Councillor Troster. We might see 1, 2. I don't know that it's going to be overwhelming, but for us to do something, to be a little more daring, to be a little more open to this possibility, I'm more than welcoming of it. And I will just say that, once again, I understand completely the concept of trying to encourage people to come back to the core to work. Our suburbs are booming. We have businesses open. We have people in our communities. They're able to pick up their kids from work. They're able to do things in the area. So the key for me and my community is not to see them commute out of the community. It's to see that liveliness instilled in our core. And that's really, this is a piece of that for me. So I do support that. And I will just also say in terms of CILs, I fully understand Mr. Weary's comments, and I understand he is standing up for the parks plan and having that. I've traveled around the world. You can have plazas that are concrete, but they're filled with life because people are there at 10 p.m. at night and their kids are there and there's playgrounds and things. There's different ways that we can inject life into our communities and parks and interactive spaces than the typical way that, we're used to. So I'm very eager to see what Councillor Troster is going to be doing to do that. She's mentioned a couple of facilities, and I think we can think outside the box on this one. So anyway, I just wanted to say I fully support both of these. And I think that it's a very kind of elegant solution with this motion. That's not too daring, but just enough, which is kind of perfect for Ottawa. Little bit of fun, but not too much.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Well said. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments. I'm glad for the clarification on the HST for the province. So it's already been calculated in, so that I appreciated that, and I don't think that was clear at the beginning. My question is, CLV, who already has converted a building, did they get any incentives at all?
No.
Okay, but somehow they managed it. And I get that there's different buildings or, different prices. So for cost of converting, but I agree with my colleagues that, this is not affordable housing by any means, but it's more housing and we need more housing. I appreciate that. I also appreciate the comments of Kevin regards to space for parks and green space. And we can't forget climate change. It's great to have people downtown because it means they're not driving everywhere to get to work. that kind of thing, but we need creativity. Is that something that can be looked at? And these are the conversations we need to have, in like green roofs and in the buildings, or those mini parks everywhere. I think we can, you know, when I look at New York City and places like that, are these things that can be taken into consideration?
Thank you, Chair. So I think the councillor mentioned some things on green roofs and things like that. That's certainly something that has been looked at and is looked at as part of the amenity space. But perhaps if there's an additional comment through the experience of development review, we could add some. Do you have anything to add on that for what happened on 473 Albert?
Not specifically. I mean, 473 Albert, excuse me, Chair, is I think a good example of the types of conversions that we would expect to see in downtown from a former office to residential. It is a good example to look at in terms of what they did, and they do have really successful amenity space in that building. Part of the benefit of what's recommended today is actually the relief from zoning. That application had to go through, I believe it was either a zoning amendment or minor variances to establish compliance with a bunch of number of things that were already existing, like setbacks, parking spaces, aisle widths. So part of the recommendation, I think, is a big benefit is removing that zoning piece to recognize that existing buildings being converted from office to residential are deemed compliant, and then adding that flexibility about where amenity area can go in a building. Otherwise, that example at 473 Albert went through our standard process that existed at that time, which in my opinion would have been far more stringent than what's recommended to this committee today.
Okay, thank you. I take it the costs are going up, and that's part of the reason that developers are coming to us. I'm just trying to create a balance. Since this is not about affordable housing, it's about housing for sure. I just want to make sure we don't touch our affordable housing funds. That's key, that we have to keep those separately, and we're talking deep affordable, not CMHC affordable, but we need to keep those funds separately so that we can build places for people of all income levels to live in the core as well. And I know Councillor Troster has many of those residents too. So, and we're doing that. OCH is doing that at Gloucester and Rochester. So that's my concern, is not to touch that money. I guess it's the question is the incentives to get them to build, period, because if they didn't, they just leave them and they leave them empty. Or is it to incentives that they pass on to renters? And if they did, how could we guarantee that did get passed on to renters?
Thank you, Chair. So the incentives is to streamline the process so that building office residential conversion occurs.
Yeah, just to make it happen. Because they talked about that they would, you know, in terms of passing on to the renters, that was said, but we don't have any guarantee on that. Okay, no, I appreciate that. Like I said, I think any housing is good housing, but we just need to, as a city, make sure we're still focused on affordable housing and we're not muddying this to take away from that, which is very much needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. Just on the amenities conversation, the other thing that the delegation said was the concept that if you're taking, if you look at a building and you see that it has a potential to have like pools and open spaces, green, you know, gardens on the top or whatever for the people who live there, then that then makes our public parks less crowded, and, you know, so they're not taking up spaces or in public pools or swimming lessons, right? That, I mean, that was my understanding that that's what they're doing. Is that actually anything that's ever taken into consideration when we're looking at a parkland amount or percentage? And do other cities ever consider that, like where there may be parkland-ish things right in the building?
Mr. Chair, I see the two items as two distinct items, one being amenity area and one being parkland dedication, whether that's in the form of of land or cash in lieu. Every building that goes in through a site plan application or zoning bylaw requires amenity area that's intended to be amenity area for the residents of that building. Generally speaking, they're designed as private amenity area, whether that's balconies, common indoor rooms, rooftop terraces. Cash in lieu is, as we know, is supposed to be more broad for a public space that's city owned, whether that's a park or a community facility. So while there's a public benefit to both of them, there is a bit of a distinction between what is privately accessible and what's publicly accessible.
Right. So other cities, we don't know of anybody that considers that as a part of, because it offloads, that it's a benefit to the community.
I'm not aware of an incentive of that nature that would offload against parkland dedication.
Okay. My main question here was in the chart you provided, which was very helpful about what the equivalent incentive was in dollars. There was one line in it that indicated just time. And, you know, I think our argument is that time equals money. And I hope that in this pilot, that amount, there's some estimation of what that means, because we sit here at planning committee and developers tell us all the time about how the time it takes costs them quite a lot, that's a really big thing. It's not just that it's frustrating or that they're bored sitting around waiting, that it actually means money. So I would like it if we could somehow get an indication, because that is an argument made by developers to us, that time equals money. So how much money is that? And that's something maybe that will come out, because you just have a blank in your slide for it, right?
So what we have is a hypothetical example. So what we were able to measure, and this is obviously a hypothetical. So for a $20 million property held at a 6% interest rate, that would represent a payment of $23,000 a week, resulting in about $296,000 in savings for a 90-day process.
Is that like what I'm getting at? Is that developers have confirmed that then saves them? Like, I feel like it's quite complicated when they tell us that time equals money, and that we don't actually understand what they mean when they say that, when they're trying to argue that we take too long with everything.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a hypothetical example. So this is not something that we've confirmed. That's perhaps something that we can bring back in the new year with the meeting with industry to discuss this further.
Okay, that's what I'm really getting at. I would really like that conversation to take place, because we hear it so often that I would like a number attached to it. What does it really mean? Because they just say, oh, construction costs go up and whatever. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Trosser, did you want to wrap up? Councillor Tierney has put his hands up. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. First of all, really good discussion today on all of this. I'm very happy to hear a lot of the discussions about conversion. I just want to point out a couple of quick things happening in my ward. And like Riley, when I got into office, I had a big goose egg in my CIL account. But the good news is we're building, I think the chair can probably confirm, I have a lot of tower applications in now. They're building all over the place and my funds are getting greater, which I'm happy about. So now on to new construction, which does take quite a bit of time. And it could take years and people could sit around on land. When I see opportunities, and I'm just going to cite one real quick, Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, is 1600 James Naismith Drive. It's the old TD business building that's located directly across the bridge from Gloucester Centre. They've gone ahead. They'll be able to get going on that project and convert it. It's 218 units. Could they have sat on that land for several years longer, waited for rates to drop? I'm just glad they're going ahead with that project so we can get some housing. I do also like some of the comments that were made today by Councillor Lowe. I think we have to continue the conversations with industry. They're still digesting a lot of what we heard today as well. I don't think we even realize the GST, the fact there's what buildings and where specifically, and how it affects different parts of the city, like Councillor Johnson mentioned. You know, I have projects I want to get converted. I don't like seeing empty towers in my area. I'd rather see people living in them. And there'll be another one coming up soon to this table at some point, and I'm quite excited about it. That being said, Councillor Lowe did mention talking to industry. Maybe it could be even less than 8. I think those discussions still have to take place and what that incentive actually looks like. The one box that I keep looking at is speed. I don't want to look at an empty building for years and years and years. I'd rather see it converted and communities being built. So I will be supporting Councillor Troster today, but in hopes that we still have more discussions with industry as we digest the rest of this. I think this is a good opportunity to do what we want, which is build communities quicker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll just wrap quickly. I want to thank everyone for your support. And I think it is really important that we tease apart, as Councillor Kavanaugh said, when we're incenting nonprofit deeply affordable housing, which is a completely different stream than when we're talking about here. This is really about revitalization of downtown. I'm a big fan of pilots. As you know, the pilot for the alternative crisis response is also coming to Somerset Ward. And I do think that pairing that with trying to fill derelict empty buildings with people will have a significant impact on the quality of life downtown. The only thing that I'll ask, and either staff can take this as a friendly direction, or I could add it to the motion, is I would really like to be involved in those conversations about this potential pilot as the motion stipulates. I think it's really important because, as I've said to some of the developers who have come to talk to me, if it's a speed issue, if it creates a tipping point between doing the project or not doing the project, I would like them to come to us on a case-by-case basis to consider a deeper subsidy if it's means the difference between doing the project or not doing the project. But as I said, we have to be quite conservative and quite careful with taxpayer dollars because, you know, we certainly can't afford to do what Calgary did, for example. So thank you so much. And really thank you to Vice Chair Gower for his assistance in drafting this motion and really thinking it through. I think this is a really good example of us trying to think through a challenging issue. And I think my motion gives us a start and also an opportunity to keep talking and to see what more we may be able to do in the new year, and to keep it really time limited and ward specific, because thank you, Kevin, for defending cash and live Parkland. It is really, really important, and it's not something we want to undermine on a broad scale. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. And this is I think it's a very thoughtfully crafted amendment. I just want to pick up on a discussion. I can't remember the specifics from maybe a month or so ago. You know, staff have not recommended a financial incentive for residential conversions. And, you know, it is very much our place as a committee and as a council to set the policy. And I certainly appreciate all of the work that staff have done to get this residential conversions policy on the table. The one financial mechanism that the development community is seeking in order to build or do more of these conversions is the cash in lieu of parkland. And I absolutely understand staff's reticence to dip into that or to reduce that or to see a significant diminishment of it, because to Kevin Ware's point, these are the funds that will make these neighborhoods in which the converted buildings are located actually livable. And that's part of our long-term sustainability. But I think Councillor Troster's willingness to forego on the basis of an intimate knowledge of her knowledge of the ward's needs, some of the ward specific funds is a really compelling compromise that I hope this committee is going to support so that we can, as a council and as a committee, create at least this first relatively limited incentives. So thank you very much, Councillor Troster. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Gower, for bringing that forward. Did anyone want a voice vote on the Troster motion? Is that carried? Is the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. Great discussion, colleagues. So with that, we will conclude the meeting after a few short bits. There are no in-camera items today. We've already passed the IPD. Are there any notices of motion for subsequent meetings? I don't see any. Inquiries. Councillor Johnson has an inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the inquiry reads, on August 10th, 2023, over 77 millimeters of rain fell on Ottawa in a matter of hours. The result was considerable flooding across the city, including in many private basements. With climate change increasing the number and severity of extreme weather events each year, increasing the number and severity of extreme weather events each year, stormwater management systems and private property flood protection must be robust and effective. In College Ward, some properties pre-amalgamation had been allowed to fill in their ditches. Some newer infill projects had not been stopped, even as their permit applications demonstrated that they were filling in their ditches. And other residents still have not maintained their ditches over time. This has created a patchwork stormwater management system that is not functioning and creating flooding in people's homes. City View is undergoing a massive stormwater management rehabilitation project over the next 10 years to correct this and to restore the neighborhood's ditches. But as intensification continues in the area, residents expect assurances that this will not happen again. Can we get clarity on the following? Number one, how did City View's ditch system get to such a state? How were so many properties able to allow their ditches to fail or to fill in their ditches and block culverts? Number two, is a ditch and culvert system an inferior stormwater management system to storm sewers? Can it handle the planned intensification for the City View community? How do planning, real estate, and economic development and infrastructure and water services departments coordinate to ensure that new development construction maintains essential stormwater management infrastructure? Does infrastructure and water services review planning applications that come before Planning and Housing Committee, the Committee of Adjustment, or are built as of right? What safeguards are in place to ensure that construction is completed in accordance with specified plans, particularly regarding stormwater systems? Where, and staff did approve this, by the way, I know it's long, where stormwater infrastructure was impacted by development, what can the city do to ensure that issues are fixed? And what could be done to force the original builder to fix these problems rather than holding the current homeowner responsible? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Is everyone, I'm sorry we didn't have a full day meeting yesterday on the infrastructure master plan.
Sorry.
Yeah, it could have been a great week. Vice Chair Gower, you also have questions.
I do. In December 2022, substantial updates were made to the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System in support of Ontario's Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act. Has staff analyzed how these changes affect land use planning and environmental protection in Ottawa? What are the conclusions?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I don't believe we have any other business. We are adjourned. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Chair.